Hi everybody, and welcome to our new Skills for Work video from Microsoft Excel. In this section of the video we are going to look at manipulating columns and rows in an Excel worksheet. And by manipulating I mean how do we adjust the width of the columns and how do we adjust the height of the rows. And we'll also look at how to insert columns and insert rows, and also how to delete columns and delete rows. And finally we'll look at how to insert and delete individual cells and why we need to be careful when we're doing that as well. So I've got a brand new blank workbook open, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in using my control and mouse wheel trick. So I'm pushing the mouse wheel away from me while keeping the control button held down to zoom in, just to give you a better look at things. And we can see that we have A, B, C, D. These are our columns in our worksheet. Our worksheet is called Sheet 1 and I'm in Book 1. So this is a brand new blank workbook. And I'm working on the brand new blank default sheet that is provided with every new workbook that's created in Excel. And we know that our rows are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to type in the following days of the week, but I'm going to skip one of them. I'm going to go from Monday to Wednesday, and all I'm doing here is as I'm typing is I'm pressing the tab key on my keyboard. Remember, we can use the tab key to tab over or to progress over one column at a time. And I'll type in just the weekdays. I won't bother with Saturday and Sunday. So the very first thing that we'll look at is how to adjust column widths, and we can see already why we might need to do this. We can see that the B column is not quite wide enough to display the word Wednesday. Now if I left click on each cell which has a value in it, remember the actual value of the cell, in other words what's really in the cell, because sometimes when you have a formula or a function typed in, you'll see a value down here, but you'll see the actual formula or function up here. But I can see the actual value of each cell, and the days of the week that I've typed in are displayed in the formula bar up here. So remember, the formula bar always displays the actual value of the cell. So we needn't worry that the rest of the A and the Y have been cut off or truncated from cell B1. It's just that the column is not wide enough to accommodate it. So how do we get around that? There are multiple ways of doing it. I'm going to show you a couple of ways. I'm going to show you a manual way of doing it, and I'm going to show you an automatic way of doing it. And the automatic way of doing it is probably the easiest. What we do, and it's probably the most convenient, what we do is we hover our mouse over the dividing line between the column headers. Can you see me hovering my mouse over the very thin line, dividing line between the column headers? These are our column headers, the things that are lighting up here, A, B, C, and D. And I'm hovering my mouse over the dividing line between the B and the C column. Now you might be thinking, well, why not hover it over the dividing line between the A and the B column? And I'll explain why in a second. I'm going to hover my mouse over the dividing line between the B and the C column, and my mouse changes to a double-headed arrow. You may not be seeing this double-headed arrow in this video. I recently discovered that the screen capturing software that I'm using just renders the mouse pointer. It doesn't render the mouse pointer that I'm seeing right now on your video. You may be seeing it, you may not. When you do it on your own computer, you will, however, see that double-headed arrow appearing. And that symbolizes and indicates that Excel is now waiting for you to do something with this column width. So if I double left click when my mouse pointer looks like this, you can see that the column has automatically widened out to accommodate the widest thing in it, which is Wednesday. There's nothing else in the B column. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to go back over it again, just hovering my mouse over the dividing line between the B and the C column, double left click, and there we go. That's all there is to it. That is how to automatically adjust the width of a column. The reason we didn't hover the mouse over the dividing line between the A and the B column is that when you do this, when you hover your mouse over dividing line between two columns and double left click, it automatically adjusts the column to the left of where the mouse is. Okay, so to the left of this line, in other words, the column here. If I was to do the same between the A and the B column, watch what happens to the width of the A column, double left click, and you can see that the A column got narrower. So you double left click on the dividing line at the right hand side of the column that you want to actually adjust, to auto adjust. So the column then, if you like, to the left of where your mouse pointer is, will then auto adjust to whatever width it needs to be. Let's do it for Friday, the D column. We can see that we have a bit of space here that is not really needed. So if we hover our mouse over the dividing line between the D and the E column, because it's this column I want to change, double left click, and there you go. So that's how we auto adjust the width of our columns. Every column has a default width when you start a new workbook and have a new worksheet, but you can auto adjust those. You can also manually adjust the column width. So that's what we'll look at how to do now. And it's almost the same process, but not quite. What we do is we go to the same line. Again, I want to auto adjust the Wednesday column, or the B column, should I say. And we don't double click. This time what I do is I hover my mouse over the same dividing line, but this time I left click and I hold my mouse button down. And when I do that, you'll probably see a little flag pop up with the current width of the column. So the current width of the column is they're measured in units, and this is 10.71 units, or 80 pixels wide. And in fact, if you want to know the default width of any of the columns, when we left click, there's 64 pixels in width, 8.43 units. I've just gone over to the E column here, which I haven't manipulated yet, or the F column, same again, 8.43 units, 64 pixels. But I did auto adjust the B column. So if I left click and hold my left mouse button down, I can see that it is 10.71 or 80 pixels. I'm keeping my mouse button held down, and now I'm dragging the mouse to the right. And what I can do is I can adjust the column to whatever width I want it to be. If you did have a unit size or a pixel size that you were aiming for, you can do it that way. There's a slightly easier way of doing it by specifying the number directly. But you can also just do it visually. I can see here that you can see the way that the line here is giving me an indication of how wide this column will be, as well as the ever widening column header. And when I release the mouse, my B column is now considerably wider than the other columns. Let's try it with the D column with Friday. So I left click once, hold my mouse button down, and drag it out to as wide as I need it to be. And then of course what I can decide to do is I can decide to auto adjust the column back. So rather than trying to fine tune it back, I can simply hover my mouse over the dividing line and then double left click, and the column gets as wide as it needs to be. Now it's important that you understand what I mean when I say as wide as it needs to be, because if I type in hello world, hello world is now the widest thing in this column. But notice that the column hasn't auto adjusted. It hasn't widened itself to accommodate this new content that I've typed into cell D2. And it looks, when we're looking at cell D2, it looks like hello world, as if the O or L and D of world are going into the E column. But they're really not. That's just a visual characteristic of Excel. And we can prove that by left clicking on cell D1. And again, don't forget the formula bar will always tell you the contents, the actual contents of the cell that you're on. So I'm on cell D2, I can see it up here in the name box, and I can see that all of hello world is contained in D2. Even though it looks like O or L and D of world is in cell E2, if I click on cell E2, I don't see anything. That's because there's nothing there. It just looks as if the rest of the word world is going into the E column. So again, if I double left click now on the dividing line between D and E column, because I want to change the width of the D column, double left click on this, and now I can see that hello world is the widest thing now in this column. It's wider than Friday, so the column has automatically adjusted to accommodate the current widest thing in it, which is hello world. If I delete both of those, I'm left clicking on cell D2 and I'm pressing my delete key, and I'll left click on cell D1 and press my delete key. And if I just type in the number 1, which is very, very narrow, and double left click, you can see now that the column has automatically narrowed down to accommodate the widest thing in it, which is currently the number 1. So that's all there is to adjusting, auto adjusting and manually adjusting column widths in Microsoft Excel. There is another way of doing it finally before we move on to adjusting row heights. And again, there are numerous ways of doing what I'm about to show you, but I'm going to show you probably the easiest way of doing it, and that is that we right click on the column header of the column that we want to adjust. So I'm right clicking on the D column header and I get this pop-up menu. Now it's a right click, not a left click. I get this pop-up menu. I have an option down here, third last option on my pop-up menu, which says column width. If I left click once on column width, I can type in, and this is measured in units. Now obviously you need to know, we're not going to be doing exams, but sometimes you will see A specific question or a specific task might ask you to change a column width to a certain number of units. This is how you would do it, or this is one of the ways you would do it, probably the easiest way of doing it. So what we do is we right click on the column header, the column that we want to adjust, we go to column width, and we would then type in the number of units in this box here. So it's currently set to 1.2 units, 1.29 units, which is very narrow. I don't need to delete that because the second I start to type, 1.29 is selected, so it will disappear. I'm going to type in, I'll type in 100, and then I left click on the OK button. And now you can see that it's become extremely wide. In fact, so wide that it's now gone off the edge of my screen. So I'm going to zoom out a lot, and I can see now that the D column is 100 units wide. If I hold my mouse button down, I can see width 100 units, and that's actually equates to 705 pixels. So if I double left click again, I auto adjust it back to accommodate the widest thing in the column. Let's try it with the B column. I'm going to right click on the B column header. I'm going to go down to column width. I'll make it a good deal narrower this time. I'll make it still wider than it is, but I'll make it 40 units and click OK, and there we go. If I hover my mouse over the dividing line between B and C, hold my mouse button down, I can see that I've made it 40 units in width, which is equivalent to 285 pixels. A pixel is simply a square on the screen that makes up a picture. Okay, don't worry too much about what pixels are, how they work, but it's just the little squares that make up the picture. Every picture on your screen, your whole display in fact, is made up of tiny little squares called pixels. So that's it. In the next section of the video, we're going to look at how to manipulate row heights. So we'll look at how to auto and manually adjust row heights, and also how to specify a number in units for the height of our rows. Alright, in the previous section we saw how to auto adjust and manually adjust the width of the columns. So our A, B, C, D and so on columns in a Microsoft Excel worksheet. In this section we're going to look at how to do the same thing but for rows, okay, for the rows which run along down the screen. And it's a very, very similar process, okay. We can manually adjust, we can auto adjust, and we can also specify a number in units. So let's see how to do it. I'm going to create a new worksheet by clicking on the new sheet button down here. Just because I want to keep it completely separate from what we were doing before. And I'm going to type in some text, some numbers, my own name, and let's say today's date. Alright, there we go. So I've got some text, some numbers, some varying, actually I'll type in the date as well. I'm going to type in, let's see, 24, okay. So I've got a number of different kinds of, remember when we were looking at formatting our data, formatting our number types and formatting the data that's in our cells. I've got a number of different formats here, just to give you an idea. The thing you'll notice is that the rows are the same height all the way down, in the same way that the columns are the same width when we start a new workbook and a new worksheet. We saw that we can hover our mouse over the dividing line between the A and the B, or the B and the C, or whatever two columns we want, and if we hold down our mouse we get to see the width, the current width of the column. We can do the same with rows. If I hover my mouse over the dividing line between the 1 and the 2 and hold my mouse button down, I can see that it is set to 15 units, and that is roughly equivalent, not roughly, it is actually equivalent to 20 pixels. So again, my mouse pointer currently looks like a double-headed arrow pointing up and down instead of pointing left and right. You may not be seeing this in the video because of the screen capturing software that I'm using, but you will see it on your own screen at home. So I'm left clicking and I'm holding my mouse button down, and I can see that the height is set to 15 pixels. Sorry, 15 units, and that's 20 pixels. Let's try our auto adjust. Let's double left click. And nothing happened. Let's try it for row 2. And again, remember when we wanted to auto adjust a column, what we did was we went to the right hand side of the column that we wanted to adjust, and we double left clicked. And what happened was then the column to the left of our mouse pointer auto adjusted. Similarly, when you're auto adjusting a row, what you do is you double left click on the dividing line at the bottom of the row that you want to adjust, and it will auto adjust. Except it doesn't seem to be working for us here. It doesn't seem to be happening. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that just as we can auto adjust columns to accommodate the widest object in the column, Rows can be auto-adjusted to accommodate the tallest thing in the column. So think vertically instead of horizontally. Okay, this would be horizontal, this would be vertical. But the reason we're not seeing anything happening here when I try and auto-adjust any of these rows with content in them is that the row is already tall enough to accommodate the biggest thing in it. We don't need to auto-adjust it. Excel doesn't need to auto-adjust it because the row is already perfectly suited to adjust what's in it, or to to display what's in it. So how would we get around that? Well, what we could do is we could try making our text bigger. So let's try doing that. Let's left click on cell A1, and I'm going to left click on the down arrow, and I'm going to left click on 24. But you'll notice that as we did that, the row got as big or as tall as it needed to get in order to accommodate the newly increased font size. I'm now at 24 in cell A1, whereas the others are all Calibri 11. So I'm more than twice the size for my font in cell A1. But if I double left click again, it doesn't auto adjust because it doesn't need to auto adjust, because the row is as tall as it needs to be to accommodate the tallest thing in it, which is hello. There's nothing else in any of these. So that's interesting. So how will we get around that? How will we auto adjust in order to accommodate maybe something else, or how will we manually adjust? Well, we can manually adjust in exactly the same way that we manually adjust the columns. If we hover our mouse over the dividing line, at the bottom of the row we want to adjust, we hold our mouse button down, and you can see my row height is currently set to 31.50 units, that's 42 pixels. I'm keeping my left mouse button held down and I'm dragging the mouse. And now you can see the line, this line here is moving down, keeping the mouse button held down, and you can see the row selector, as they're called, these squares over here. The 1 is currently shaded, that means I'm in row 1. That's getting taller and taller. If I release the mouse, now we can see that we have manually adjusted the row height. Now, to be honest, it's probably too tall, but it may not be, depending on the look that you're going after. This is really a formatting decision, okay? It's a style decision. Don't forget, it doesn't change the data in your cells, it's just a formatting decision. If I wanted to now auto-adjust this this row back to the automatic height that it needs to be to display the tallest thing in it, I can do my double left click trick. So I'm hovering my mouse over the dividing line between 1 and 2, I'm double left clicking, and now the row snaps back to the height that it needs to be in order to accommodate hello at size 24. Let's manually do it again, left click and drag, and there we go. So you might think, well, what would be the point of adjusting row heights if they're always going to be the height that they need to be, unlike column widths, which may not be? And again, it's down to formatting, it's down to styling. We can do certain things with what's known as vertical alignment that we can't do, or that we don't need to do with the horizontal alignment, or may not need to do with the horizontal alignment in columns. I'll draw your attention up here to these 3 buttons in the alignment group on the Home tab. We've seen that we can left align, center align, and right align, but we can also top align, center align, and bottom align, or top, middle, and bottom, I should say. So what these will do is they will align content relative to the cell. And by relative to the cell, I mean at the moment this is bottom aligned. Hello appears at the bottom of the cell, and you can see that the bottom align option is already set because it's highlighted, and the left button means that it's left aligned to the cell. We saw that text and numbers were right aligned or left aligned by default. Text is left aligned by default. But I can override this default vertical alignment by clicking on the next button over, which is middle align, and that aligns text so that it's centered between the top and the bottom of the cell. Let's give it a go. There we go. And now let's try top aligning it. That's it. So that's something that we can do with row heights. When we have the row height set to taller than it needs to be, what we can do is we can set the alignment on an individual cell or on a range of cells. I could select multiple cells here, and I could set the alignment. For instance, I'll select these cells here and I'll set the alignment to middle, and that means now that anything that I type into those cells, and that you can see that the font is smaller, but it doesn't matter because they're still going to be middle aligned because I specified that they should be middle aligned. So that's how to auto adjust and how to manually adjust row heights. A lot of the time you're going to be manually adjusting them. And then if you're wanting to actually specify a value in units the same way that we did for columns, it's very easy to do. What we do is we right click on the row number that we want to adjust. And very similar to when we right clicked on a column header and we got column width, if I click on a right click on a row number, I get a very similar pop-up menu, but this time it says row height instead of column width, because Excel is going to select the entire row. It's very important to realize that the entire row is selected. And if I left click once on the row height option, I get up a very similar dialog box, except this time I specified the number of units for the row height instead of the column width. I'm going to make it 55. Let's see how tall that is. It should be pretty tall. Pretty tall, yeah. A good bit taller than it was. If I right click and go to row height again and type in something mad like 100, you'll see that it gets very, very tall. Let's right click on it and see what happens when we specify 1. Now, as you can see, it's done it, and it's done it so much that I can't even see the number 1. So it's obliged, but of course that would make no sense because I now can't see the content that's in it. So what I could do is I could do my double left clicking trick. This will be tricky with the mouse because the line is going to be very narrow here, but I am actually hovering my mouse over the dividing line between the one row, which I can barely see, and row number 2. And if I double left click, now the row snaps back to be as wide as it, or sorry, as tall as it needs to be to accommodate the tallest thing in it, which at the moment is hello. Notice that my middle alignment is still set. Hello is actually middle aligned now. 5 is middle aligned, C, and so on and so forth. These are all middle aligned. I can set them to top. It's very hard to see hello move to the top, but there was a very barely perceptible shift in it. And the reason that you barely saw it happening was because hello is just so big. It's 24, whereas these are small, so we can much more easily see them jump up. Set it to middle, set it to bottom, and there we go. So that's all there is to manually adjusting the height of rows and also setting the alignment, the vertical alignment, top, middle, and bottom for rows that may be taller than they need to be. And again, that might be a style or a formatting choice because you might want labels or headings maybe at the top of the row or maybe in the middle of the row. Just it's an aesthetically pleasing thing to do. All right, that's it. In the next section of the video, we're going to look at how to delete columns and rows, and also how to insert columns and rows, and finally how to delete and insert individual cells as well. So I'll see you in the next part of the video for that. In this section of the video, we're going to look at how to insert and delete columns and rows, and we'll also look at how to insert and delete cells. We'll look at rows and cells in the next two sections, but in this section of the video, we're going to look at columns. We'll see how to insert and delete columns. I've got a brand new workbook open, book 1, as you can see up here, and I'm on sheet 1, the default new blank sheet that you get when you create a new workbook in Excel. I've typed in the days of the week from cells A1 to D1, but I've skipped Wednesday. Now, obviously, if you're typing in the days of the week, you're not going to forget Wednesday. But imagine if you were typing in a work schedule for somebody or a roster for somebody, and originally they were not supposed to work on a Wednesday. They weren't scheduled to work on the Wednesday. So I've just typed in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then a change came about, and somebody did actually have to come in on the Wednesday, so I need to add that column in. How do I do it? Well, there's a couple of long-winded ways that you could do this. I could click on cell C1 and I could type in Wednesday. But then I have to go to cell D1 and type in Thursday, and then to cell E1 and type in Friday. That's quite long-winded, but it would do it. It would do the job. Just undoing here, and I'm going to go back to the original state. That's one way of doing it. A second way of doing it would be to cut and paste these two cells. If I cut and paste these two cells and move them over by 1, that would give me a blank cell here into which I could type Wednesday. Let's try it out. I'm left clicking on cell C1, I'm holding my left mouse button down, and I'm dragging my mouse over to cell D1 and then releasing the mouse to select these two cells. And what I'll now do is in the Home tab in the clipboard group, I'm going to click on Cut. And if you recall from our cutting and copying and pasting video, what that will do is it will flag these cells for moving. So when you see the word cut or think of the word cut, think of moving. You're actually going to move the content in these cells. Now what I can do is I can click on cell D1, and what I can do is click paste. And because I had two cells selected here, Excel knew that it needed to move these two cells into these two cells. So you don't need to worry about how does Excel know how to copy and paste these two over or cut and paste these two over. It's going to know that if I just click on cell D1, all you have to do is click on the cell from where you want to begin pasting, and Excel will take care of the rest. So I click on paste, and Thursday and Friday are moved over to cells D1 and E1. Now I can click on cell C1 and again type in my missing day of the week. I'm just going to auto adjust my column by clicking on the dividing line between my column headers, which we looked at in the last section, just to auto adjust the column so that Wednesday is entirely visible. Again, that's a bit long-winded. There's a quicker way of doing it, and that is inserting a column. Now, before we look at how to insert a column, it's important to know that when you insert a column, you're not really inserting a new column. Remember, in the very first video, in the very first class that we had in Excel, we saw that there were quite a number of columns in Excel. They were labeled A, B, C, D, and so on. And obviously we only have 26 letters in the English alphabet, so when we get to Z, we run out of letters. So what we do then is we go AA, AB, AC, and so on. We wrap around and we introduce an extra letter to symbolize or to represent that column number that we're on. And then we go BA, BB, BC, and so on and so forth. And then we go CA, CC, CB, CC, and so on and so forth. That goes all the way across to, you can go to the very, very far right-hand column in a worksheet by holding down Control and pressing the right arrow on your keyboard, and that will bring you to column XFD. And if you wanted to work out the math behind that and actually look at how many columns per that combination of letters, you'll see that it actually transpires that it's 16,384 columns in a worksheet, in a standard worksheet. Far more than we'll ever need, but just to let you know. So clearly I've gone Control and my left arrow now to go back to where I was. You can also go Control and Home, which will bring you back to your home cell A1. So it's important to realize that what we're about to do is not going to give us 16,385 columns. It's essentially going to do what we did a second ago. It's going to kind of cut and paste everything over one, okay? Everything is going to be cut and pasted over into the D and E column, and then the C column will still be there, but it will be empty. So just to give you, make sure that you understand that distinction. It's not hugely important, but I'd like to kind of underline that. So let's see how to insert a column. There are three ways of doing it. I'm going to show you the three ways. The first way for me is the most convenient way. It's the fastest way. Don't worry about memorizing these three methods. Just pick one that works best for you. But this is probably the method that I would use more often than not. What we do is we right click on the column header. These are your column headers, your A, B, C, and so on. I'm right clicking on the column header, which is going to be to the left of where I want the new column to appear. I want a new column in between B and C so that I can type in Wednesday. So what I'm doing is I'm right clicking on the C column because I want the column to appear in front of or to the left of this. So this method will always insert the new column in front of or before or to the left of the column that I'm right clicking on. So right click on the column header, go to Insert, and that's all there is to it. Thursday and Friday have been moved over to cells D1 and E1, and we have, if you like, in inverted commas, a new column. And we really don't, it's just that everything has been moved over, and anything else that would have been or may have been in these two columns will always also be moved over as well. So I'm going to undo that and show you again. I'll also type in maybe just a couple of names here, just to show you that everything is moved over. So I right click on cell C1 on the column header, sorry, not on C1, but on the column header C, and I go to Insert, and Excel moves everything over. It moves everything that's in the C and D column over to the D and E column. So similar to that cutting and pasting thing that we looked at, but much, much quicker. And now what I can do is I can type in my missing data. Wednesday. Wednesday is a really difficult word to spell or type. And I'm making a pig's ear of it again. There you go. Wednesday. We can't see all of Wednesday, so what I'm going to do is double left click on the dividing line between the C and the D column. We saw how to do that in the last section, and that will auto adjust the column width so that it's wide enough to accommodate the widest thing in the column. So now we can see Wednesday. So that's the first method for inserting a column. I'm going to click on my undo button up here. A quicker way of undoing is to also hold down the CTRL key on your keyboard and tap the Z or Z key. Don't hold down the Z key, just hold down Control and then tap the Z key, and that's a keyboard shortcut for clicking on undo. It's quicker than going up here to the quick access toolbar and clicking undo. They'll both do the same thing, but holding down Control and Z is quicker. So that's all there is to it. That's all there is to the option of actually right clicking on the column header, going to Insert, and then inserting the new column. The second method is almost as quick, not quite as quick maybe, because you might be in a different tab. On the Home tab, there's a cells group over here towards the right hand side of the Home tab. And what this lets us do is it lets us format, insert and delete various things like columns and rows and cells. With this option, what you need to do is make sure that you're anywhere in the C column. or anywhere in the column that you want to have the row inserted before. In this case, again, I want the column in between the B and the C column. So I need to make sure that I'm anywhere at all in the C column. You don't need to select the column, just make sure that you're anywhere in the C column. And by anywhere, I mean on any row. Doesn't matter what row you're in. So in the cells group on the home tab, I'm going to left click once on the insert button, and because there's a down arrow underneath it, it means there are more options for inserting various different things. I'm going to insert sheet columns. It's the third option down, and again the same thing happens. These are just multiple different ways of doing the same thing. A new column has now been inserted. Just undo that and do it again. Again, I need to make sure that I'm on the right column, but it doesn't matter what row I'm on. Left click once on insert, go to insert sheet columns, and that's it. My new column is now being inserted, and I type in Wednesday, and that's it. Auto adjust again, and I have the exact same result. There is a third option. It's probably not an option you would use maybe very much, because it's a bit long-winded. There's an extra step that's introduced. In fact, there was an extra step here as well, because we had to click on insert and then we had to click on insert sheet columns. The third option, there's an extra step as well. What I can do is I can right click on any cell in the C column, any row in the C column. And I'm going to get up this pop-up menu, and there is an insert option roughly quarter way down. So if I left click once on insert, I'll get up a dialog box. And here's the extra step. Excel now knows that we want to insert something, but it's asking us, what do we want to do? Do we want to shift cells right, shift cells down? We'll look at that in a future section, just coming up in the section after next, actually, when we're looking at inserting cells. So we'll ignore these two. We could insert an entire row. We'll ignore that for now. What we want is the last one. If I click the little circle, these circles are known as radio buttons. If I click the last circle, the radio button for entire column, again, because I'm in the column, C column, it's going to insert it to the left of the C column, and again everything is moved over. So let me do that one more time. Again, I can right click anywhere at all, go to insert, and make sure that entire column is selected, and then click OK, and the new column is now inserted. So that's all there is to it. 3 methods for doing exactly the same thing. Personally, I find the first method that I showed you, right clicking on the column header and then going to insert, you will always insert the column to the left of that column. Okay, it will always appear before or in front of that column. That's all there is to inserting columns. Now let's have a look at how to delete columns. We may want to delete a column. So in this section we'll now look at how to delete a column. Let's imagine that it turns out that that person didn't need to work on Wednesday after all, so they're not scheduled to come into work, which means that we can delete the C column. We can delete the Wednesday column. Again, we could do it the long-winded way by deleting the contents of C, but then I'd have to move everything back here. I'd have to cut and paste it, or I'd have to type it. We don't need to do that. All we need to do is delete the column. I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing it. The quick way is to simply right-click again on the column that you want to delete and go to delete. That's it. It really is as simple as that. Let me show you that again. I'm simply right-clicking on the column and I'm left-clicking once on delete, and Excel knows that I want to delete the entire column. That's method 1. Method 2 is a little bit more long-winded, but will pretty much do the same thing. What I do is make sure that I'm anywhere at all in the column that I want to delete. I don't need to have it selected, just make sure I'm anywhere in the column. And again, on the Home tab, in the Cells group, there is a delete button. And again, the down arrow indicates that there are other options underneath this delete button. In other words, for what I want to delete. I can delete individual cells, rows, I can delete the entire sheet, or I can delete sheet columns. That will simply delete the column that I'm currently in. Let's give it a go. And there you go. Everything has been moved back over and the column has been deleted. Simple as that. The third option is to right click. These are very similar to the inserting, except what we're doing is we're deleting, but the steps are the same. If we right click anywhere at all on the column, and by anywhere I mean on any row, doesn't matter, and go to delete, I get up this dialog box again, so there's an extra step, And what I need to do is select entire column and then click OK, and the column has been deleted. So 3 different ways for deleting columns, 3 different methods for inserting columns. They will all 6 methods for inserting and deleting will do exactly the same thing. So don't worry about memorizing all of them. I just wanted to make you aware of the 3 methods. For me, the easiest method is simply to right click for inserting and go to insert, and for deleting, right clicking and going to delete. But pick the method that's best for you, and then when you get comfortable with it, normally what users do is they start to branch out and investigate other methods for doing the same thing. But for me, those are the 2 quickest ways of deleting and inserting columns. So now that we know how to insert columns and delete columns, let's go on to inserting and deleting rows, which we'll look at in the next section. Now let's look at how to insert and delete rows. And the good news is inserting and deleting rows is a very, very similar process. The steps are very similar to inserting and deleting columns. I've changed the worksheet around this time, and I've typed in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday from cells A1 down to A4 instead of across the way. So now they're going down this way. And I've skipped Wednesday again, pretending that this is a schedule for somebody's work roster and they weren't in on Wednesday, but now it suddenly turns out that they are in on Wednesday. So how do we insert a new row for Wednesday? Again, we could type in Wednesday in cell A3, that would overwrite Thursday, but then we'd have to type in Thursday here, and then we'd have to type in Friday here, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit long-winded. Or we could cut and paste these 2 cells down by clicking on cut, and then if we click on cell A4 and click on paste, Excel will paste those 2 cells in from A4 down to A5. Again, that's a bit long-winded. Much easier to just insert the row. Now, like columns, it's important to realize that technically we're not inserting a new row. If I hold down Control and hit my down arrow key on my keyboard, you can see that I've been taken down to the very last row on the worksheet. I have 1,048,576 rows, which is far more than I'll ever need. Control and Home will bring me back up to cell A1. So when we do this, when we insert a row, as we're going to do now in a second, we're not going to end up with 1,048,577 rows, or if we were to delete a row now, we wouldn't end up with 1,048,575 rows. You're going to have the same number of rows and columns, but essentially what we're doing is it's kind of like cutting and pasting everything down, okay, so that you're going to end up with a blank cell or a blank row on the row that it originally had the content. So that's technically speaking what we're doing, but we use the terminology inserting rows because to all intents and purposes visually it does look like you're inserting a new row, but really you're just moving everything down by 1 row. Not hugely important to know that, I just wanted to make the distinction. So let's look at 3 methods. There are 3 methods for inserting a new row, and they're very, very similar, almost identical in fact, for inserting a column. Instead of right clicking on the column header, what we do is we right click on the row that we want to insert a new row above. I want a new row in between Tuesday and Thursday. So what we do is we right click on row number 3 on the selector. Now don't right click on a cell in the row because you'll get up a different menu. In fact, very similar to how we inserted columns, one of our methods previously. We'll be doing that in a second. But we're going to look at the quickest method, which is right clicking on the row selector. These numbers here are your row selectors. 1, 2, 3 and so on. So I'm right clicking on the number 3 and getting a pop-up menu, and I left click on insert, and that's it. A new row has now been inserted, and I can type in Wednesday. That's all there is to it. I'm just going to undo that by holding down Control and Z. Do it again, right click on the row selector. Again, make sure that you're right clicking on the row which you want to move down. In other words, you want the new row to appear above the row that you're right clicking on. Go to insert, and that's it. You've just inserted a row. So let's undo that and let's look at the second option. The second option is again very similar to how we inserted columns. In this method, we don't need to be in any particular column, but we do need to be on the correct row, which is in contrast to when we were inserting a column in this method. It didn't matter what row we were in as long as we were in the correct column. In this method, it doesn't matter what column we're in as long as we're in the right row. So it doesn't matter which of these cells, as long as I'm in the correct row. I'm going to right click on cell C3, so it's the 3rd column I want to insert a column above. I go to insert. We have a dialog box here, and what we're going to do is we're going to select entire column. So I want to insert a column above this existing column. Left click once. Sorry folks, I'm inserting a row. Right click on any cell at all in the row, go to insert and click entire row, getting my rows and columns mixed up. Left click OK, and we have a new row inserted. That's all there is to it. We'll just undo that, and again, we can click over here just to show that it doesn't matter which column you're in. Right click again as long as you're in the third row, go to insert, and then left click on entire row. And then left click OK, and you will have a new row inserted above the row that you were currently in. That's the second method. The third method, I might have done these in a different order to the way I did them in columns, but the three methods are the same, is to again make sure that you're in the row that you want to insert the new row above. These rows will always appear above the row that you're in. And on the Home tab in the Cells group, I'm going to left click once on the Insert button, and I'm going to left click on Insert Sheet Rows. That's it. We have a new row inserted above our existing row, and everything else has been moved down one row. So that's all there is to inserting rows. So now let's look at that. We know how to insert a row. Let's look at how to delete a row. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is just put in the row first of all, type in Wednesday, and now what we'll do is we'll look at how to delete this row. Now I want to delete the row that I have Wednesday in. Okay, so I want to delete the entire row. Very easy to do. Three methods for doing it. The first method is probably the quickest, most convenient. We right click on the row selector and we go to the delete option about halfway down, and Excel will immediately assume, but won't ask us anything in the same way that it didn't ask us when we right clicked in a column header and selected delete. It just immediately assumed that we wanted to delete the entire column. Same here. When we right click on the row selector and go to delete, Excel just assumes that we want to delete the entire row and everything else is moved up one. That's the quickest way. Let's undo that and let's look at the second option. Second option, very similar to deleting columns. On the Home tab in the Cells group, if I left click on the delete button, you'll see there's a down arrow. Again, we were here in the previous section, and this time obviously we want to click on delete sheet rows. Click on delete sheet rows and that row is gone. In other words, the row that I was in has now been deleted. Let's undo that and click on the undo button. You could hold down Control and Z as well. And let's look at the third option. Third option, almost identical to the option for deleting columns. Right click on any cell in the third row. Doesn't matter where, doesn't matter which column you're in. Right click on any cell and go to the delete option. The delete dialog box pops up and Excel asks us, what do you want to do? Do you want to shift cells left or up? Do you want to delete an entire row or an entire column? We want to delete an entire row, so we make sure that the entire row radio button, that's what these circles are called, is selected, and we click OK, and that's it. Everything is moved up one row. So that's it. 6 methods overall, 3 methods for inserting rows, 3 methods for deleting rows. Again, don't worry about memorizing all of them, just get comfortable with one. But right clicking for inserting or deleting is probably the quickest option. But I just wanted to make you aware of the other two options as well. Okay, in the next section we're now going to look at how to insert and delete cells, which is going to be very useful, although you do need to be careful how you do it. It's not very often you'll want to do it, but I'm going to show you a practical example of when you might need to do it and then how to do it. In this last section of the video, we're going to see how to insert and delete individual cells. Now, this example that I've come up with is a bit convoluted. I had to kind of think hard about how I could actually practically show you an example of where you might need to insert cells and where you might need to delete cells as well. So this is the best I could come up with. I think it serves to illustrate the purpose of what I'm talking about relatively well. You never know when you might need to insert or delete an individual cell. So let's have a look at how to do it. And first of all, let's look at what we're actually doing. Again, you have the same number of cells in a worksheet as you will have all the time. How many cells do you have in a worksheet? Well, if you multiply 16,380 by 1,078,576, you're going to come up with quite a lot, well over 1 billion cells. You're always going to have the same number of cells in a worksheet. So again, it's important to realize that when we're inserting cells or deleting cells, we're strictly speaking just moving things around. We're not really creating new cells. Again, an important distinction, not hugely important to know maybe, but I like to kind of highlight the distinction. Here's the example that I've come up with. I've typed in Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I've pretended that Alan is working on Monday, Mike on Tuesday, nobody's in on Wednesday, so we won't worry about new rows. Susan's in on Thursday, David is in on Friday, and we don't yet know who's in on Saturday. We haven't yet decided that. Maybe nobody wants to come in on Saturday, so we're drawing lots or something. And then something happens and it suddenly transpires that the person that was in on Saturday can't do Saturday but can do Monday, which means that Alan doesn't have to come in on Monday. He can come in on Tuesday, Mike can come in on Thursday, Susan can come in on Friday, and so on. So I'd have to reschedule all of these and remove them around. Again, I could cut and paste like this, cut and go to B2 and then paste. That's one way of doing it. I'm just going to undo that. Or you could do it the really long-winded way and start typing in Alan here and so on. And then I'd have to go back up here and delete Alan from here and so on. I mean, that would be a very, very long-winded way of doing it. Much easier way of doing all of this is simply to select, or to insert a new cell. Now, you might think insert a new row, but unfortunately what's going to happen when I insert a new row is the following. If I right-click on row number 1, I'll just use one method for inserting a new row. This is going to happen. Everything gets moved down. Everything gets moved down. What I want is I want to only move these guys down, one cell each. And the way we do it is we simply right click on Alan's cell, which is B1, and we go to insert. And this is where the shift cells down and shift cells right will come in. What we want is we want to shift the cells down. Okay, we want to shift them down. And we do this by simply making sure that shift cells down is selected, which it is by default here. We click OK. Now I'll just move this so you can see the effect. Okay, nothing else is affected. Okay, we don't have a new row up here. We don't have a new row in between 1 and 2. Alan, Mike, Susan, and David have simply been moved down one cell. If you like, a new cell has been inserted here. Let's do it again. I right click on the cell that I want to insert a new cell above. It's very like rows in that way, in that the new cell will always be shifted down when we do it this way. If we select shift cells down, it's going to be inserted above. So I right clicked on cell B1, the insert dialog box appeared, and I'm specifying that I want to shift the cells down. Click OK, and that's it. Everybody is moved over one. That's all there is to it. There's another way of doing it, of course. I'm just going to undo that, and if we go to insert up here, you may remember it from inserting rows and columns. Left click once and insert, and if I left click on insert cells, I'll get up the same dialog box where Excel is asking me, what do I want to do? Do I want to shift the cells right or shift the cells down? I want to shift the cells down. So I left click OK, and now the cells are moved down. And I've inserted the new cell here, and now I can type in maybe the new person, Brian or whoever, who is going to do, couldn't do Saturday but could do Monday, and everybody else has been reallocated. So maybe a bit of a contrived, or maybe a bit of a, you might think, well, how often are you going to need to do that? You'd be surprised. You never know. When you're doing things like rosters and schedules, or any kind of worksheet really, you never know when it might be handy to insert an individual cell rather than inserting a row and then having to move everything around. You do need to be able to know how to insert individual cells. Now let's imagine that Brian is really messing us up and saying, actually, wait, no, I can't do Monday after all, I can do Saturday. What we want to do maybe is move everybody back up one, and then we'll have a blank cell down here. So how do we do that? Well, we right click on the cell that we want to delete, and we simply left click on delete, and we're asked, do we want to shift the cells left or up? I'm going to give you an example of inserting and shifting cells right and left and up and down. I'll show you the difference. For now, just make sure that you understand that when we left click on shift cells up, which is selected for us automatically, everything below this cell is going to be shifted up one cell. So let's have a look. There we go. And now we can type in Brian down here. So that's all there is to it. Let me do that again. We simply right click on the cell that we want to delete, go to delete, and we make sure that shift cells up is selected. Everything is moved up, and then we can type in Brian down here. The other way of doing it is, again, you might have guessed, over here in the delete button, in the cells group on the home tab, we simply click on delete and we go to delete cells. The same dialog box pops up. Make sure that shift cells up is selected. If you want to move your cells up, in other words, the cells beneath the cell that you want to delete, click OK, and everything is placed into these cells, and now we can type in Brian. And that's all there is to inserting and deleting individual cells. In the next section, we're going to end this video now, but in the next section, before we sign off, I'm going to very quickly show you how you might want to maybe do it for columns. Okay, you might want to insert or delete cells and shift cells left or right, as opposed to up and down. So that's what we'll finish off with in the next section. In this final section of the video, we'll see how to insert and delete individual cells in a worksheet. It's a similar process to inserting columns and rows. I've got a workbook here, sheet 1. This is similar to what we were working on in the previous sections of this video, and I've got the days of the week typed in from A1 to A5, and I have just imaginary employees typed in from B1 to B5. And we're going to pretend that we want to insert somebody before Mike, so we're going to pretend that 2 people are working on Monday, and one of these people is working before Mike. Now, this is kind of a contrived example. I mean, you know, it'd be quite easy to fix this, but it's just an example to show you how you can actually insert a cell and maybe reduce the amount of work that you might need in order to do something. Obviously, I could, if for instance, let's say Brian were working before Mike and I needed to move Mike over here, obviously I could cut Mike by clicking on cut, going to C1 and then going to paste, and then I could type in Brian here like this. We know we could do that. But there is another way of doing it, and there may be, I mean, again, this is a very simplified example, but the process would be the same for a more advanced example if you had more data and more complex data, but you still wanted to insert a cell rather than moving things around. It's very easy to do. All we do is we right-click once on the cell that we want to insert a cell before. Now, we've already seen the insert menu on the pop-up menu before. So if I left-click once and insert, we know that we get the insert dialog box. Now we can ignore entire row and column. We don't want an entire row, and we certainly don't want an entire column. If we clicked on entire column, the problem is, yes, it would give a space before Mike, but it would also give a space before everybody else. And we don't want space before everybody else. It's just Monday. Monday is a special day where 2 people have this shift. So I've just undone that, and I've gone back to the original state, right-clicked again on cell B1, gone to insert. What we want to do is we want to do one of these 2. We want to either shift cells right or shift cells down. Hopefully you'll see that shift cells right is exactly what we want to do. We want to shift this cell to the right and have a new cell. Now, new in inverted commas because it's the same as inserting columns and rows. You're not going to end up with more cells in your worksheet. You're going to have the same number of cells. It really is just a question of, it's almost like copying or cutting and pasting this over. It's the same kind of effect that you end up with. So if I make sure that shift cells right, the radio button for that is selected, and I click OK, you'll see that Mike moves over, but nothing else does. That's all there is to it. That's all there is to it. Of course, I could do that for any of the rest of them as well. Let's do it for Tuesday, and this time I'll look at a different way of doing it. I'll go up to the Insert menu, and I'll left-click once on Insert Cells. Again, you must be sure that you're on the cell that you want to be on. So if I click Insert, and click Insert Cells, and what we want to do is we want to shift the cells right, and there we go. That's all there is to it. Now, what about deleting cells, deleting individual cells? Well, you'll be happy to hear it's pretty much the same process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert another cell here, and I'm going to shift it right, and I'm going to say that Susan is working in front of Frank on the Monday. What we want to do now is we want to delete Susan's cell. Okay, we want to delete this cell, and when that happens, Frank's cell is going to be moved back over one, so C1 is going to become the new B1. Because I want Monday then to just have one day. I don't want a blank cell after I delete Susan. So how do we do that? Well, very easily. We simply right-click on the cell, we go to delete, and this time instead of the insert dialog box, we have the delete dialog box. And we can either delete an entire row or column. We've seen that before. We can shift the cells up, in which case everything would move up. But we don't want to do that. We want to shift cells left. In other words, everything that's to the right of Susan, or the cell that Susan is currently in, will be shifted left. Let's see it working. Let's make sure that we have shift cells left selected, and there we go. That's all there is to it. Let's see it working again. We simply right click on it, go to delete, and then in the delete dialog box make sure that shift cells left if you're wanting to delete this way horizontally, and the cells to the right of Susan will move over. They will shift left, and click OK. Let's see another way of doing it using the delete button again up in the cells group on the home tab. If I click on delete and click on delete cells, I get to the same point. I get to the same dialog box. It's just a bit more long-winded doing it this way. Sorry folks, just going to cancel the phone call. So it's the same process and I get to the same point, but I need to shift the cells left, click OK, and exactly the same thing happens. Precisely the same thing happens. That is the end of this video. That's all there is for manipulating columns. We saw how to manipulate the width of a column, the height of a row. We saw how to insert and delete columns and rows, and then finally we saw how to insert and delete individual cells. There are 2 exercises at the bottom of this, so I'd recommend, if you're able to, if you have the ability at home, go through them. Let me know if there's anything that's causing you problems. Just drop me a line and I'll get back to you, or leave a comment if you like below, and I'll get back to you. And in the next section, in the next video, we're going to take a tentative look at formulas. Not formulas, functions. We're going to look at functions. We don't need to know a huge amount about functions, but we're going to look at just 4 simple built-in functions in Excel. So I'll see you all in the next section for that.